Hello, bonjour, comment ça va? On commence le webinaire. We are getting things started here for everybody. Hello, I'm just checking in to make sure everyone can see me and hear me before we get truly underway. I think this is good. I don't see any chats, any messages saying I can't hear you. Although, okay, hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Livre Canada Books webinar on audiobook streaming and subscription models for international distribution. We're very happy to have you all here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gabrielle Echeverry. I am the Deputy Executive Director at Livre Canada Books, and I'm here today just to help facilitate a Q&A if needed, and to introduce our lovely speaker, Michele Cobb. So before we get started on the presentation itself, I'll just make a few housekeeping notes. Today's presentation will du temps à la fin pour répondre à vos questions. Pour accéder à l'interprétation vers le français, cliquez sur l'icône d'interprétation au bas de votre écran dans la commande pour la réunion. L'icône ressemble à une globe. So for those of you who need interpretation, please click the icon in your meeting controls. Those really should only be necessary for people who are looking for English to French interpretation. After the both languages via the Q&A function, which you should be visible to submit questions. If you or have any questions relating to the Zoom platform, or my colleague Elena Taillon, and we'll as the host in the problème, ou si vous avez des questions au sujet de la plateforme Zoom, veuillez m'envoyer un message privé en tant que host à moi ou à ma collègue Elena Taillon. So, without further ado, we're very pleased to be hosting today's webinar, providing key insights on audiobook distribution and streaming. We're very happy to have Michele with us today. The explosion in audiobooks popularity has led to and been facilitated by this rapid expansion in distribution platforms. And today's presentation will cover some of the latest audiobook industry developments, including information on some of these key platforms, as well as information on best practices in international audiobook distribution and monetization, different types of audiobook streaming and distribution business models in selected markets, as well as the opportunities and challenges that these present for Canadian publishers. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Michele Cobb, who will be giving us a glimpse into this incredible market growth. Some of you may recognize Michele from a webinar we did a few years ago on the global audiobook market, which was a really great presentation, and probably to this day still one of our the report that accompanied that presentation was probably one of our most popular and most downloaded reports, by the way, Michele. So we're very happy to have you here. Michele began her career working across the globe as a theater director and general manager before she became involved in audiobooks, and she spent over a decade at the BBC Audiobooks division in the US. Now in the executive teams at LA Theatre Works, Audiophile Magazine, and MMB Media, she's a recognized expert in digital media with a focus on audio. She also serves as the executive director of the Audio Publishers Association, the Podcast Academy, and PubWest, and she consults for clients in the media space. Yay, clients like us who are very happy to have her. So welcome, Michele, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to answering your questions. It's funny because as we put together this report on audiobook streaming and, subscription models, a lot has been changing. So we're writing it in September, and even since then, things have changed. So I will try to provide some insights into those changes, as well as the basics of what's going on in the market. I'll start off with that the news continues to be good in terms of audiobooks. There's significant growth in both production and revenue. So the Audio Publishers Association has brought us some great figures that we'll take a look at today. One of the big reasons that we are growing so much as an industry is that there's been a lot of support from technology, which we will talk about. And the other thing I think is important to point out is that there's room for more growth as we go. In the US, less than half of the population has ever listened to an audiobook. So in a market that is probably the hottest market for audiobooks in the world, there's still plenty of people to buy, which is a great place for publishers to be when they're thinking about adding audio to their portfolios. All right, let's take a look at these North American publishers reporting sales to the Audio Publishers Association. We do this as a sales survey once a year, and we have found 10 years of double-digit growth in revenue, which is an amazing run. Don't know how it will look for 2022, but up to now, it's been quite good. Just those publishers that are reporting found $1.6 billion. This is largely sales in North America, though it does include some international sales. Now, there are very few associations that are doing sales reports on audio, but we have some estimates from around the globe, and we think that it was about $4.5 billion as a total worldwide market in 2021. And we're estimating that to be about $5.5 billion when it comes to 2022. And we've seen some estimates as high as $35 billion and projected to be that by the end of the decade. I think there's a lot of room in there, but the good news is we're growing as an industry and there's a lot of interest in the format. One of the reasons that publishers have been growing so much and sales have been growing so much is that as a group, we're making more titles. When I started in the industry 20 years ago, there was only about 2,000 titles made per year. And you can see that between the late 90s and 2006, that didn't really progress too much. So now there were 3,000 titles instead of 2,000. But we start to see things take off in 2011. And this is where we found the introduction of the do-it-yourself platform. This is a space where an audiobook publisher can, make a title, connect with the narrator. A publisher that does not have an audiobook team can find both a way to produce and a way to distribute their titles. And in 2011, that's where we saw the launch of Audible's Creation Exchange, which was the Audiobook Creation Exchange, known as ACX. Independent authors started to self-produce their titles. Small publishers without audiobook lines started to self-produce their titles, and we've seen that a lot of growth happened out of that. What we started to see happen with that increase in titles was that we started to influence and interest more people. Now you can see we've really grown over the past 10 years, and there's some major reasons for this. First of all, technology has been an important piece of the puzzle. 20 years ago, when you made an audiobook, you took a print book, you broke the spine, you photocopied it, and you made it available to the narrator, generally through the mail or through FedEx. So it took days for the narrator to receive their script. They went into the studio, time to mark it up. It wasn't a very efficient process. Once we started receiving titles as a PDF and being able to send them to a narrator, it really increased efficiencies. Then around that same time of 2011, we started to see narrators producing audiobooks themselves from their homes with a home studio. This was a key element to the rise in the number of titles being produced because taking out that commuting time, that really helped. And in fact, when we hit the pandemic, narrators, most of them already had a home studio, so they could continue to produce and audio publishers could continue to make titles right from the safety of their own homes. We were already sort of in pandemic mode with many narrators wanting to stay inside the booth and not interact with a ton of humans so they wouldn't get a cold. The other thing that's been happening in the last few years is we've seen some production help from AI. There's software that can help you, once you've recorded a title, actually compare it against the written script, find any mistakes. This can speed up the post-production side as well. So we've seen self-publishing, we've seen the technology helping, and we've seen a rise in the way people can distribute their titles. Years ago, you had to deliver each title by itself, by hand, and we'll talk about that more when we get to distribution. But as we've seen in the last 10 years, there have been an increase in the number of aggregators where you can deliver a title and they'll send it out to multiple retailers. The other thing that I think people think a lot of is as we increase the amount of titles, we're seeing more original works. And although this is true, that means it's a title that's audio first or never has a print component, like an audio drama. This is still a small piece of the market overall. It is a growing piece, but the lion's share of the market is still the single-voiced narrator audiobook. So I think we see a lot of publicity coming around these original work titles and these full cast audio dramas, but it's still a small piece of what's going on. All right. I think it's really important to understand the different business models when we start talking about audiobooks and all that is happening in the market. So let's take a look at what we're seeing today. First of all, very straightforward, a la carte or the pay per listen model. This is where a customer purchases a title, the majority of which are digitally today. We don't see a ton of sales in CDs, so we won't really talk about that. This is a digital copy of the title. They can download it into the app from the company that they've purchased from. They can have it as an MP3 file that they can move to a different device. And purchase of the title may be within an app or it could be through another service. This is the biggest model for technology companies. Apple, Google, and Spotify all use the a la carte model. And Spotify just launched this a la carte model in the US at the end of September. When it comes to subscriptions, this is where things get a little bit more complicated, but also a little bit muddier. So the US market was built on what's called a credit subscription. This is when a subscriber to the service commits to a certain number of titles per month that they're going to buy. It could be 1 credit, could be 2 credits. The thing about the credit subscription is that you own that title. So if you've bought a copy from audiobooks.com and you're on that 1 credit per month plan and you decide to cancel your plan, you still have access to that title that you acquired when you were on the plan. This is a fairly straightforward way of doing it. Using the credit subscription allows the vendor to take your money. It's usually about $14.95 per month, and you're not technically buying it through the app, so they don't have to pay the fees to Apple or to Google for that credit. And this is a key piece of the puzzle, because as we look at the next type of subscription model, which is unlimited, this is when you're familiar with the Netflix model for video. It's very similar. So it's a collection of titles that are available from a particular vendor, and those are streaming. When you cancel your subscription to that vendor, you no longer have access to these titles. And you'll see Storytel, which is a big international retailer of audiobooks, and Scribd, which is a US-based retailer of audiobooks. They are using this unlimited model. Now, a lot has been talked about with Spotify. Spotify for podcasts, for music, is in fact an unlimited subscription service. When they launched audiobooks in the US, and it's now since launched in UK, Ireland, Australia, more countries. So they launched it as an a la carte model. So you don't have audiobooks included in your subscription to Spotify. However, for years, Spotify has in fact had a small subset of titles available in the music area. So people can and have obtained titles through Spotify. These tend to be titles from smaller publishers, and it's not quite the breadth of collection that you would expect to get from a large retailer. So when they launched in the US with titles from the big five, they launched with that a la carte model. You have to buy it outside of your subscription through Spotify. And they've been fighting with Apple about how that transaction can occur. So now when you go into your Spotify app, you can see that you can purchase this a la carte or pay per listen audiobook. However, you can't do it from the app. You have to go to their website, and then you can have it loaded into the app for listening later. This has been a bit of a wrinkle and a fight as the two big companies, Apple and Spotify, try to make it work or not work for each other. But that's, essentially why we're not seeing Spotify do the unlimited model, is publishers are not picking up that model. Otherwise, it would feel like something that was natural for Spotify. Then we have the hybrid model. This is a fairly new model, and hybrid is kind of my take on how you describe this. So Audible built itself on the credit subscription model. That's been their thing for years. However, for the last few years, they've been offering other titles, largely originals, many of which are high-profile celebrity titles that they are producing. A person who has a credit subscription can access these additional titles as they like. They're not part of that credit, so they have access to an entire collection that can fill out their listening each month. So it's still a credit subscription, but it has a large collection of unlimited available titles. However, when you cancel your credit subscription, you will not be able to access those original works or those unlimited titles anymore. And that's what makes it hybrid. The newest model that we've been seeing coming out this fall from some of the European vendors is the tiered subscription model. This was launched by Bookbee in Spain and Storytel in France very recently. And this is where a consumer commits to a certain number of hours that they will listen to per month. So you could buy 10 hours or 20 hours or 50 hours. And that allows you to hop around between titles. And it's really about the time you're listening, not the titles. Hopefully that all makes sense. All right, do you think it's important that we talk about the library market as well? Long before audiobooks were super hot in the retail market, we did see that audiobooks were doing great in libraries. In the early days, it was on CD, but once Overdrive launched into the library market, long before they had success with the ebooks or even too much video, they were selling and exposing people to a lot of audiobook titles. There's two models that we see most often. The one book, one user model. This was what Overdrive launched with at the beginning, when the library purchased a certain number of selected titles, and then one person can take them out at a time, and you go into a queue if the title is already out. So that means that people actually have to essentially wait in line to listen to something. A number of years ago, we saw another vendor launch in the market, Hoopla, with a pay per circulation model. Interestingly enough, now both of these vendors offer both models. Pay per circulation is when the library has a huge collection of titles for patrons to choose from, and they base their payments on what the patron chooses. So if I would like to take out a book and my friend Chris would like to take out a book, we can both take them out at the same time. The publisher receives a smaller fee per each circulation, but they can amass a large number of circulations over time. So in the one book, one user model, the publisher is paid once for that title. And in the pay per circulation model, they're paid a smaller amount, but many, many times. We also see some other models, like simultaneous access, especially in the school market, but this is really what we see the most. And I like this phraseology. Someone said, pay per circulation model is patron driven. They're really making the choices. And the one book, one user model is library selector driven because they're making the choices of what titles are available in the collection. All right. Here we go. This is kind of what's happening in the overall landscape. We've talked about this a number of times, but I like to reiterate it because I think it's very important. We're seeing more titles. So thus we see more listeners, and thus we see more revenue. So big companies are increasing the amount of titles that they do, and this has a trickle-down effect in the market. It used to be that a company like Penguin Random House would produce maybe 100 or 200 titles a year on audio. Today, they're more in the 1,400 range per year. That means the titles that they previously would have sold off the sub-rights to audio to an independent audio company, that portion of their collection is actually smaller. So what that causes the independent audio publishers to do is to dig deeper and look for other companies that they can work with to acquire sub-rights for a title. So the production has increased. It's caused everyone to make more of their list. That's caused publishers who are independent to go look at other places to acquire titles and to, have a little bit more fun doing originals and all of that. What we have seen in the market, especially in the past couple years, is that those big publishers, especially the independent ones, have started to become bigger by acquiring other companies. So it used to be that there were small audio publishers, large audio publishers, and a lot in the middle. That's something that has really changed in the last few years. We really don't see many of those medium-sized independent audio companies anymore because they've all been acquired by bigger audio companies. We do see some challenges in the market despite all this growth, and that is publisher resistance to some of these business models. It can be scary to put your titles into an unlimited subscription model, for instance, because the consumer might be paying $10 a month. And if that consumer is listening to 100 different audiobooks a year, your portion of that $120 per year that they are spending can be quite small. But the idea is that more people listening, more people subscribing, more revenue, it rises the tide. We don't have good figures on that currently in this country, in the US, because there is so much resistance to that. But we do see the success of companies working in the unlimited model globally. We've also seen some challenges in how the technology companies like Apple and Spotify are in, fighting each other kind of in these models and understanding all of that. We know that there is pressure on the market because this is a type of product that is an entertainment product. We did very well in the pandemic because people weren't going to the movies. They had a little bit more spending money. Today, as prices rise in other areas with gasoline and food, it is possible that people's listening habits will go down from paid sources as they're feeling pressure in their pocketbooks. Podcasts are generally an ad-supported product, which is very similar to audiobooks. Understanding the differences and seeing those two elements potentially support, but also potentially fight one another is going to be interesting in the next few years. And one of the big things that we do see is consumer pressure for having something that is easy to use. So being able to go into an app, select the title that you want, start listening right away, to be able to, easily find something else to listen to, good ideas, discovery, all of that. Now, with nearly 74,000 titles per year produced, there's a lot of competition in the marketplace, and consumers want it to be easy, accessible, and inexpensive. All right, let's deep dive a bit into podcasts, because podcasts have been growing significantly over the last 10 years. We see an increase in their revenue, and we see a very similar product to audiobooks in different ways. If you give a consumer an audiobook and a podcast and don't tell them what it is and they just listen, it's possible they might not be able to tell the difference because the content and the presentation of it can be very, very similar. But podcasts have been supporting audiobooks in many ways. We've seen the rise of audiobooks come at the same time as the rise of podcasts, and that's often because people go back and forth between the two types of experiences. Once you have tried a free podcast, if you like the audio experience, you're very likely to give audiobooks a try as well. Podcasts can help you create bonus content for an audiobook. And we do see people release a title over a course of weeks or months as a podcast, then put it all together with some bonus content and repackage it for sale as an audiobook. We've also seen podcasts that have done very well be then written into a book form and then also released as an audio. So there's lots of stuff that happens in between them, and we consider them in many ways gateways to each other. Podcasts can be a great way to market your title as well. So we'll continue to think about podcasts because they can help authors, go out and talk and reach new potential markets. All right, one of the big things that has been talked about in the audiobook world, especially in the last 18 months, is the use of artificial intelligence. This text-to-speech function, which has been available in some of the big retailers with ebooks for a long time, has never been something that was easy to listen to. However, technology marches on and the voicing is starting to get better. So you have your text-to-speech that you can turn on with an ebook. You can turn this on now. Google offers text-to-speech and can read an audiobook for an author. So that's something that is not going to change. We do think that the market will have a portion of titles done in the text-to-speech artificial intelligence narrator voice. It's faster to produce and less expensive than human voice narration. So that's going to be a piece of the market, specifically in the area of books that haven't been and will never be produced in audio, generally due to their number of sales. We've also seen some developments in artificial intelligence with human voices being used to create the base. So someone is recorded with thousands of words that they say, and that voice is developed with a computer and with human intervention to be able to create an audiobook in a particular voice. As I said, this allows you to produce that lower level backlist content. And we know that lots of the big companies are working on improving the offerings here. However, we also know that one of the main reasons that people listen to audiobooks is for that performance. That human narrator makes an emotional connection with the listeners. That's a lot of the reason why people listen to audiobooks, and there's still a major gap there. We have for 20 years probably fought a bit with people over why does someone listen to an audiobook? Is it cheating? Is it not really reading? And a lot of it comes down to the fact that your brain is lit up when you're reading with your eyes or your ears in the same place. And a lot of that lighting up from the audiobook side of things comes from that emotional connection with the words, which we're not currently able to get with a computerized voice. All right, let's go off in a totally different direction, but also technological. The NFT, or the non-fungible tokens, these are things that publishers probably are not yet spending a ton of time on, but they allow you to have exclusive and unique digital content and maybe a way to repackage content that you already have. So for instance, you may have an audiobook that sells thousands of copies, but it only has a particular cover. That cover is identifiable on all different retailers. But maybe your author is a gamer or a particular personality or an artist, and you can make exclusive digital covers and sell the audiobook with that exclusive digital cover. Now, that would be a unique product that the consumer would own. And although your workaday, regular audiobook listener may not care about that, it is a way to reach new listeners. So if your author is a gamer and they design a bunch of covers with characters around that game universe, then you might have the gamers be willing to try an audiobook product because they want the unique cover. They could be interested in a character, an author, or a title as well. So this is in the very initial stages where we're starting to see NFTs work their way into the publishing world. And I think there's a lot of exploration and potential, but it's very early on, as we say. All right. Let's take a moment to talk about different places in the world and what's happening with them for audiobooks. So France, no surprise that in France, like in most countries, the majority of listening is happening on the smartphone. That's the same in the US, same in most countries, that if you have a smartphone, you have a way to listen to a lot of audiobooks and carry a lot very efficiently. And so that's what people turn to. A surprising amount of audiobook listening is done on the smartphone, even in the home. You might think that you were plugging it into a car or taking it on a walk. But what's great about a smartphone in any country is that you can pop it into your pocket and walk around your house and go. Anyway, we see in France, heavy smartphone. We see a lot of increase in male listenership. And up to this point, Audible has been the biggest retailer with that credit subscription, and only about 15,000 titles available, as opposed to the US, where we're coming up, I think, on 500,000 titles available at Audible, if not more. We've started to see a lot of interest in audio in France. In May of last year, the Festival du Livre sparked interest, sparked conversation, and just this past couple months, Storytel has launched with one of those tiered subscription models where you can purchase a number of hours per month. And in fact, just last week, Bookwire, which is an aggregator and producer of audiobooks, held an All About Audio Summit focused entirely on the French market. Mexico. This is the second largest Spanish audiobook market. 3 years ago, Storytel opened the market with about 2,500 local language titles. We do see in whatever country you're in, it's very important that you have enough titles to entice people to come to your platform, listen, try some out. The focus in this market is on the unlimited subscription, and that actually grew significantly during the pandemic. And in several studies I've seen that they always talk about how in Mexico, there's a heavy interest in nonfiction listening. Nonfiction listening in the US goes up and down from year to year, but has been growing over the past few years with a lot of political books. In Spain, Bookwire reported in 2021 that there was a 15% rise in ebooks and audiobooks. And during the pandemic, they actually helped introduce, the publishers and the libraries helped introduce more people to audiobooks by allowing concurrent listening so that you could have multiple people listening to that same title. In Spain, the largest portion of the market is subscription, with only about 5% of the market being in library and about 15% being that a la carte or pay per listen model. What's interesting in Spain is that 2/3 of the titles are produced by just 2 publishers. However, we're seeing more and more of the American publishers produce in Spanish, whether it be in Castilian Spanish or Latin American. We are seeing more interest and activity in that model as well, or in that language as well, excuse me. All right, when it comes to the UK, just like in the US, we've been seeing some huge numbers in terms of growth. There are mixed models. The credit subscription is available, and Audible is the largest retailer there with that type of subscription, but there are unlimited subscriptions available widely as well. Here you see a much higher pay per listen activity, and the subscription much lower than, say, in Spain. And then you see a higher activity in libraries. CD in the library market in the UK have always been strong. There's also a lot of growth in younger male listeners. And Nielsen just came out with a survey that showed a slowdown in the growth of audiobooks in the first half of 2022. Some of those things that might have had an impact on that include people getting outside of their houses now from the pandemic, and of course, pressure around the cost of other goods growing so high. They do expect that by the end of the year in the UK, there will be growth in the market overall, just not at that same double-digit rate that has been so highly coveted both in the US and the UK. And what was interesting after I read this Nielsen survey, I read another article because the survey talked about a high number of people saying that they listen to audiobooks in Spotify. And this was pre-launching that pay-per-listen model. There have been, in the music service, audiobooks available. And so younger listeners were finding them. They weren't the typical listener going to a book retailer. They weren't buying on the pay-per-listen model or the credit subscription model, but they were accessing this content in Spotify itself. And this was confusing to people because many people didn't really know that Spotify offered this within the music side of the system. So it's funny, I read a couple of articles in the last few weeks, people saying, how could anyone say that they got audiobooks through Spotify before they launched? They were there, you just had to look for them. And people that were not typical audiobook users were finding them there. All right, we've talked a lot about the US market, that $1.6 billion in revenue, which was that 25% growth over 2020. Again, after 10 years, I can't imagine that we're going to see double digits for too much longer, but of course, I'm always hoping for that. Most people, again, listen on a smartphone. And what's been interesting to publishers and sort of hard, I think, for them to understand year after year is that consumers really find that audiobooks are a good way to relax. So we've seen people saying that they love to just turn off the screen and shut their eyes and listen, even long before the pandemic. And we've seen that people do a lot of their listening at home. Publishers struggled to understand this because, they were so used to the idea that you would be in your car listening. But consumers have been telling us, good to relax, good to listen at home. We've seen a big jump in the amount of kids that listen to audiobooks between the start of the pandemic and the, hopefully end of the pandemic that we're at. Nearly doubling of number of parents saying their children listen to audiobooks. The US market has about 41% of people having subscriptions, the majority of those being in that credit or hybrid subscription model. And as we've seen an increase in podcast listening and audiobook listening, we've seen a decrease in the age of the average listener. All right, here's the fun stuff, distribution and monetization. So what's always been a problem in the audiobook world is that none of the retailers agree on exactly what information should be included. So if you are manually delivering to each retailer, and now you could be delivering to as many as about 50, each of those retailers has a separate Excel spreadsheet for you to put your information in a slightly different way. And if you are delivering by hand, which a lot of small publishers do, especially when starting out, it doesn't cost as much because you can deliver the audio, the art, and the metadata to an FTP. It's just taking a lot of time to do all of those different spreadsheets. So it's a high touch delivery. We've seen come into the market in the past few years a number of different aggregators. These include Zebrilution, Bookwire, Findaway, Big Happy Family. Most of those companies have you upload into their portal the metadata, the artwork, and the audio, of course, and then they are charging the publisher a portion of the revenue, and they send it out to all the retailers. So they are creating that relationship with each of the retailers, and you're getting a report from that aggregator with all of the different retailers and one payment. Again, you're giving them a portion of your revenue. So it's lower effort, but might cost a little more. Many of the big publishers use an Onyx feed vendor. So that is anyone who has a really big collection is a good way to go. Many of the aggregators, you still have to do a manual upload of each title. And in an Onyx feed, you can actually import a number of things. So the downside to the Onyx feed is it's very expensive, but you as the publisher have the relationship with each of the different retailers. And so you can be working with each retailer on marketing and expanding your opportunity to get seen. Additionally, there are, of course, the options of the do-it-yourself, where you can do the distribution and the narration, creation of the audiobooks all in one place. All right, so the opportunities in the market. If you are a publisher that does not have your own audiobook department, one of the options is that you could sell the subrights, sell it to an audio publisher who can then produce the title and give you a share of the royalties. You can, of course, produce and develop your own collection. And there's many different ways to produce through a do-it-yourself platform. You can send the title to a production studio, or you can contract directly with the narrator to have the title created in the audio format, and you're developing your own collection that way. There are plenty of opportunities for global distribution based on your rights. So if you have English language or French language rights, you can put those out into all the different markets, and most of the retailers take multiple languages these days. What's great about the audio format, especially when you do it simultaneous with the print format, is you are fully exploiting that title and helping the author's brand by being available in all the formats that anyone could ever want. And we know that about 15% of audiobook listeners are people that do not actually read books in print. So there's plenty of room for growth there. And as we are seeing with Spotify and other retailers coming into the market and paying attention to the audiobook format, there's plenty of opportunity now to start reaching people who are outside of that book reading area and seeing their interest and hearing about their listening experiences. All right, the challenges in the market are, of course, especially with all the titles being produced now, making sure that your title is seen and heard. We are seeing that challenge in the fact that even in the US, which is a big market for audiobooks, half the people have never listened to one. So how can you be finding new people to listen? Production for audiobooks is not inexpensive. You are making a commitment to the format. And then, of course, you have to learn a whole new way to deliver. An audio file versus an ebook file is very, very different. The cover art size is different. The metadata is different. So you have to understand all those elements before you start delivering. And then, of course, there's the cost of delivery, which could be in terms of human time or could be in terms of expense in many different ways that we've discussed. All right. That sort of wraps it up for me. I would love to take your questions. And I see there's already one in the Q&A box. How does the tiered model work in terms of royalties? Well, again, there's not necessarily standards for percentages or any of that. So each publisher works out a deal with each retailer. In the case of something like the tiered subscription model or the unlimited subscription model, the publisher is generally paid on their percentage of whatever the listening was. So there's that flat fee for the month. And then if you have 10% of the listening, you will get 10% of the flat fee minus whatever the retailer's cut is. Hopefully that makes sense. It looks like there's a question in the chat box. Let's see. We're hoping to learn today about the business terms in between indie publishers and audiobook retailers. Understanding the net amounts paid to publishers by these retailers under the various models is crucial for good business decision making. Where do you go to get that kind of intelligence on the business terms available from different retailers? Well, again, there's no standards in terms of each retailer makes a deal with each publisher based on that publisher's collection size, value of title from the retailer's perspective. However, if you're working with a company like Findaway, which was recently acquired by Spotify, I should say, they work with a number of different retailers, and they show you percentages that you would get from each of those different retailers in each of the different models, and those are fairly standard. So that's a good way to actually use an aggregator to get some intelligence about what types of percentages each retailer is paying in each model. Unfortunately, unless you have a direct relationship with each retailer, you don't know what their percentage is. So if you have direct relationships with retailers on the ebook side and they have audiobook arms, you can talk to them as a first step to find out what they would be giving on the share of the audio side as well. I hope that answers the question. do we have any specific info for children's books? I think children's books is, again, another area that is ripe for growth. So there haven't been a lot of retailers specifically designed for children. And what's hard about listening to children's audiobooks or giving your child access to something like your Audible collection is it doesn't, it's so wide. I use this joke all the time, but the Cocky Rooster could be a children's book or could be erotica. So you have to be careful there. We have seen places like Epic, which have ebooks and audiobooks and are designed specifically for children, or Pinna. This is a good place to sell to because it's a closed loop, so parents feel very comfortable with getting their child that app and encouraging their listening. The other thing that we're seeing more and more of are these kind of MP3 type devices. So it's like giving a stereo or in the old days, a CD player to your child. It's a unit. And then you have cards or you have USB sticks that you plug in. And those are representative of a particular title. You know what your child is listening to. So there's a lot of opportunity there. There's the Yoto device, the Tony device and I'm starting to see more interest in that format and the devices being sold in more children's focused retailers. Children's audiobooks also do well in the library and school market. So getting your titles into retailers that work with libraries or schools is very important. The disadvantage children's titles have in a large retail market against an adult title, especially in the credit model, is that if your title is 6 minutes long or 2 hours long, and someone else's title is 30 hours long, and someone is paying that same cost for a credit, regardless of the length of the title, they're much more likely to choose a title that is long, which is generally not a children's title, when they're making their purchase. And they'd be more likely to choose a children's purchase as an a la carte purchase because it would be less expensive. In the US, the children's market, children's and YA, has generally been about 10% of the market overall, with fluctuating years when we see a really big title, and it's been a while, but like a Harry Potter title would drive that percentage of sales up. And we haven't seen quite that level of title in quite some time. Other questions I can answer?
No, I don't see any questions at the moment, but maybe I'll take advantage of my of my position to ask a question that I've been wondering about for a while. In terms of the size of the market in the US versus the size in other international markets, is it so much bigger simply because the population is so much larger, or does it have to do something with production value, accessibility, that sort of thing?
I think a lot of it is just time of having available content. So in the US, we have a larger number of titles available and they've been available longer. And that's really had an impact. A lot of these markets like South America, Latin America, even Europe are relatively young comparatively, and thus haven't had quite the level of pickup. We see the Asian markets like China and India, those are growing markets, but India is a good example of you have to have a fairly inexpensive product to have wide pickup. So I'm seeing some interesting things come out of there, like people talking about a daily subscription. So you could listen for one day and pay a small fee. And I think we're going to see a lot more creativity in models in other places in the globe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to bring up at this moment? We have a few more minutes available here. if we don't get to any more questions today via the chat or the Q&A function, and you think of something afterwards, of course, you can always send me a question directly and I'll forward it on to Michele. So we can definitely answer any other questions then.
Yes, I will say a big part of what I do is travel internationally and talk to people, and I welcome your questions after that. I just got a question out of Sweden earlier today, in fact.
Excellent. All right, well, I think if that is all for today, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Particularly for Michele for her work with us. Thank you for the interpreters who provide an invaluable service. Oh, I think I see one more chat question. Oh, there we go. This is Elena sharing our link to our survey for this. Oh, we have one more question. Maybe what we could do, Braden, is send it to you. We'll send it to Michele via email since we're starting to wrap up here. Or if Michele, if you want to answer directly afterwards, please feel free to do so. You can make, yeah.
I just say quickly, there is Canada-specific information separate from U.S. figures, and in fact, in the report that we did, we have a link to a great report out of Canada as well.
Okay, perfect. So we'll let you know when that report is available. If you would like to fill out a survey, we'd be very grateful for your feedback. We always really appreciate any sort of feedback you have on our presentations and any of the services that we provide. We also, of course, need to thank the Canada Book Fund. And as I said before, anybody who has questions after today's session that you'd like to direct to us, please feel free to send me an email. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. And we'll see you soon at our next webinar, hopefully. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good day. Thanks, Michele.
Thank you.
See you.
Likewise. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye. Isabelle, Magali, merci beaucoup. À demain. À la prochaine. Bye-bye.